Hui, no mai haere mai. Welcome to the Operations and Monitoring Committee meeting for the 3rd of June. I'd like to welcome the public who are present, our media, and also those who may be live streaming. I'd just like to remind people that the meeting is live streamed and to please turn off your mobile phones or have them on silent. We'll have a break this morning at 11 a.m. and also lunch about 1 p.m. I'd like to ask Ms Rothwell to please open up our meeting with a karakia.
Kia hihiri tātau, tutua mai I runga, tutua mai I raro, tutua mai I roto, tutua mai I waho, kia tā ai ti mori tū, ti mori ora, ki kātaua, homi e, hui e, taiki e.
Kia ora, Ms Rothwell, thank you very much. I now ask if there are any apologies for this morning. Yes, Your Worship.
Just been notified that Rawiri Waru is coming. He's just a little late.
Okay, we'll take his apologies for lateness. And I have Councillor Kumar. Were there any other apologies? Yes, Councillor Yates.
Mr. Waru has just messaged as well. Oh, yeah. I did wonder that. I was like...
No worries. So we have Mr. Waru for lateness and Councillor Kumar for his apologies for today. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Donaton, seconded by Ms Spray. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Thank you. Any declarations of interest this morning? There appear to be none. Any urgent items not on the agenda? There appear to be none. I'd like to move to page 6 now of our minutes for the 6th of May O&M. I ask for a mover and a seconder for the motion that the minutes of the Operations and Monitoring Committee meeting held 6th of May be confirmed as true and correct record. Thank you. Moved by Councillor McPherson, seconded by Councillor Bentley. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. We would move to our staff reports. On page 11, which are operational updates for Council from Infracore, Rotorua Economic Development Limited and the Rotorua Airport Limited. Will receive this, so I'll ask for a mover and a seconder for the motion that the report operational updates for Council from Infracore, Rotorua Economic Development and Rotorua Airport Limited be received. Moved Councillor Kaifon, seconded Councillor Yates. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye, thank you. I'd like to invite Matt Scott up, please, to talk to his presentation for Infracore Limited. We've got a PowerPoint this morning and we are on page 12 of our agenda. Welcome, Matt.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning. Oh no, Jeff's not coming. I thought Jeff may be coming with me. Good morning, everybody. Reporting today on Q3 financial year 21, Infracore Limited. I should also welcome our Director on Infracore, Jeff Rolliston, who's in the room as well. Welcome, Jeff. Thank you. Kia ora. Kia ora. If you just bring your mic up close to you, Matt. There we go. How's that? All good? Okay. I'll take the reports read and take questions at the end, but just going through the key highlights. And focusing on Infracore's purpose as a social enterprise. There's been a lot of work over the last quarter. The quarter previously I spoke about memorandum of understanding that was we were working through with the Corrections Department. That's been signed now, and in the last couple of months we actually attended a site visit to Waikuria Prison. Infracore played a very important part in that because we was actually going along as advocates for the programs that they run for taking people post-sentencing and introducing them back into the workforce and back into the community. With a number of successful people that have come into the Infracore business, we were supporting the Corrections Department, taking other local businesses on that journey to understand how perhaps that could fit into their business to increase the number of opportunities that could actually be delivered. An extremely passionate visit, I guess. The inmates that we met, the experience that they gave us, they took us around their training facilities, some of which were quite impressive, some of which were quite tired. But nonetheless, you could see the dedication and the commitment from the staff within to actually take those people on a journey and get them into programs that demonstrated to us as potential employers that by the time they bring people to us, they're not, they've been through a program of creating trust. They've been in work programs within the wire, as they call it, outside of the wire. And to demonstrate, I guess, that there should be trust and confidence with the people and the candidates that they're bringing to us, that they are work fit and ready to be introduced back into the workforce and back into the community. So it was an extremely useful visit for me, certainly quite humbling, but a great opportunity for Infracore to be able to advocate for that programme. And to be able to clearly demonstrate to other businesses that it is a good way forward and there are some successes in there. We've also signed our contract with MSD as well. That's a rolling 9-month programme to bring people into the business, split into the 2 parts of utilities and parks and open spaces. The candidates come in. They undergo a training program, or training programs, in fact. They come out with key skills and tickets. It's a 9-month program. It rolls continually for the length of the contract, and we're currently undergoing the recruitment process now. So it's quite exciting as well. That has definitely got potential. The numbers at the moment are low, but once we can demonstrate that those key outcomes can be delivered, then there's certainly a good program. So from a social enterprise perspective, good traction and some good solid agreements in place. As far as KPIs, first is our statement of intent. Good, strong delivery, all greens. With the exception of one, which was for a late report in the utilities department, took us down to 78% consolidated over a 3-month period, missing the 80% target by 2%, which, whilst a shame, very much understood why the reason was. Corrective actions in place to ensure that's not repeated. From a HSE engagement perspective, just spend a bit of time talking about that for a second. The HSE element of Infracore has come a long way over the last 2 years. The number of recordable injuries, so lost time injuries, medical treatment injuries, and restricted work injuries, at one point was extremely high. Now it's very much under control. There's only been 4 in the last rolling 12-month period, and 2 of those are about to drop off over the next couple of months. So I guess that starts with the engagement of the employees. The injury rates are the lag indicator, if you like. Once you see that there, it's too late. The focus for us is very much on the engagement at the front end, ensuring that the toolbox talks are issued out to the staff, the people who are in attendance, they understand what they're reading and what they're being told, and then any injuries or events that do happen throughout that period are very carefully managed to the best outcome for the individuals, so that any potential injuries don't happen, but if they do, they're minimised and the rehabilitation is taken constructively. That dovetails into our ISO 9001. Seems like it's going on for quite a long time, possibly, from where the onlookers are sitting. It is a massive exercise. It has progressed well month on month. It's currently sitting with Kiwi Audit, and we're waiting for their confirmation of the date for their first audit on us. So the process that we've been through, we've been through all of our standard operating procedures. We've been through all of our communications and the quality aspect of the business. We do undergo self-audits, which is quite a large exercise in its own right. And then when we get to a point where we're comfortable, we invite them in and they audit us. So that's the point at which we're at currently. It'd be an important achievement for Infracore. I think it gives potential clients confidence that we've got systems in place to be able to manage the business in a regulated way. Business optimisation initiatives. This is key to the way that the business is being run nowadays, if you like. It isn't a short-lived program. It's something that continually runs. It's the way the business is run, in fact. And it leverages off of the visibility that we've created in the business. So we capture good metrics, we've got good data, we've got good systems, and we've got good reporting facilities. So the first part of being able to manage something is being able to see it. We certainly can see it, and we've made a number of positive steps to be able to drive for better efficiencies. And that's in part the foundation or the underlying point, I guess, or achievement as to how we've been able to get the financial results that we're getting at the moment versus what we've seen in the past, is that we can target our efforts, work through it systematically, understand where the cost savings and efficiencies can be made, and just continually to work through that in a continuous improvement type methodology. The big items that are going on at the moment is the Infracore Dispatch Centre review. So that's bigger than possibly it sounds. That's the whole workflow management for every aspect of the Infracore business. What it does is it moves on from the traditional position of giving the supervisors and the managers the work and giving it out to the resources, takes them out of the equation and allocates the work based upon availability and skill sets. That frees up the managers and the supervisors to be able to supervise and manage, which drives greater efficiencies, greater production rates, safer working environment, and a higher level of governance over the workforce. That would probably take a 12-month period to be introduced and embedded into the business. It's going to be a massive challenge for us. But nonetheless, once we get sort of 50% through it, we should be seeing the benefits, and by the time we get to the 100% position, we'll be a far better organisation for it. Replacements for plant and equipment is ongoing. Last year we were talking about a capital injection to replace some of that plant. That's been well used. It's brought down our repairs and maintenance costs and brought up our efficiency rates, but that needs to continue. That now continues with self-generation of revenue or of surplus within the Infracore business. Again, the reporting shows us utilisation of the plant and equipment, downtime, repairs and maintenance costs and downtime. So we can focus and spend our money wisely so that we can get the best outcomes. The nursery always features in these meetings, and it's quite popular with the people in the room. It is always a challenge for us though, and we've recently brought in a new manager after much hunting, and we're just currently going through a refresh strategy at the moment to see what improvements we can make there, and how we can make the experience better, make the production rates greater, and that ultimately is part of the business optimisation plan as well. And last but not least, further development of the client-facing Power BI reports. The intent is that council or other clients can have their own client-facing dashboards, so they can get real-time data at any point of the month. So rather than waiting for the monthly reports or the fortnightly reports, anybody can jump in there who's got access and the right level of authority, and they can help themselves to the data to see how we're performing. So they're not reliant on our interpretation of it, they can actually view it live. And that's the end of the Infracore report.
Thank you very much, Matt. I've got a question from Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Matt, with regard to, thank you for your report. With regard to the nursery area there, is there any progress on the large greenhouse that is supposed to be constructed down there?
Yeah, there is progress. The site's been cleared, but it's currently awaiting for the permits for geothermal takeoff, is my understanding. That element of it is being managed outside of Infracore. But as far as our involvement in it, there's regular meetings and, yeah, it's progressing as such.
Yeah, my second question or observation is that with regard to the city cleaning, which I'm quite familiar with, it's often commented to me that the city is looking grubby, and I'm wondering if you're still utilising the scrubbing machines and so forth that you inherited before your time.
Mm-hmm. We are currently. It saddens me to hear that it's looking grubby. It's certainly not coming through in our KPIs. But in response to the plant and equipment element, we're currently working with our supplier at the moment, and there'll be new machines on their way that will be leased.
Thank you. Your Worship, the Mayor.
Yes, thanks for the report, Matt. The two issues that I am pleased to see are the apprenticeships and the qualifications that are emerging out of the unit. And I imagine it's in your next year's plan and KPIs. Is there potential to add apprenticeships or housing capability, which is becoming a bit of a crisis for us here?
Yeah, sure.
About the ability to get building and the skills. Is that something that the board and yourself have considered at all?
What we have been discussing is the infrastructure that's required to service those plots. So the underground networks, anything in a pipe or anything with a cable, basically, rather than the actual vertical build, more the horizontal build.
Great. And my other question, I don't know what you meant with that outward-facing dashboard by something or other.
Yeah.
I think if I just say it from our perspective, when we get, it's not always a complaint actually, I don't get many complaints, but an issue that needs to be addressed.
Sure.
Is that what is being fixed, the interface with the council customer service centre and your request for a response?
It isn't that, but potentially it could include that. If that's an issue for you that needs to be resolved, then that certainly will become a priority for us. Yeah.
Sometimes it is about continuous improvement, us saying, has that little issue been resolved?
Yes.
And that's what matters for the public.
Absolutely.
So if that could be built into that by-facing capability, that would be great.
No problem.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Chair, through you. Thank you. Very useful report indeed. I particularly enjoy the way that you, in your management as CEO, are integrating a organisation development strategy alongside your corporate management strategy. These two are working together, underpinned by a fresh take on information, strategic information. I really appreciate that work.
Thank you.
My question, I had one on nursery, but that's been answered. The next one was the concerns the nature of the P&L report on page 19. There's a huge variation between the way that you do a P&L and the way that the other CCO CEOs present P&Ls. And in your weekly meetings with the CFO, I wondered if some discussion could be given to standardising those P&Ls.
I'll just jump in there. We'll take that feedback on board.
Yeah, the key question here
not
is...
a question for Matt, we'll take that on board.
Yeah.
Would it be helpful to identify the variances against the various activities, key activities of the CCO? And others do that, and it might be helpful for us to have that sort of detail. It would be helpful for me to have that detail. My final question is, when can we see the revised statement of intent? Work was done on that at the previous O&M.
Yep.
but I wondered when we can see the revised version.
Yep. So that leaves Infracore and comes to council end of play tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Also, you're most welcome. And also, just to answer that question, you'll be pleased to know in the next financial year we are looking at different reporting methods for all the CCOs so that they are more in sync across them. So it's easier to report on for us in terms of KPIs. So
I'm charmed
think you
and
will
delighted.
enjoy those improvements.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now go to Ms Rothwell, followed by Councillor Rotorua.
Thank you, Matt. Through the chair. Matt, thinking about the nursery, the plantings around the town are so impressive each year, and there's trees that I don't recognise. The way things are set out is beautifully done. I was wondering, is there any way of perhaps linking the planting or the plants that are available through the nursery and promoting how the planting is done throughout the town? So, so people like me who like gardening can go in there and see that, this street has got these trees on it. Here's some small ones, they'll grow at this rate. This summer we're planting these bulbs, and they could be available and that could be promoted. It's just a brainstorming idea.
Very much so, and what you're saying there is almost like you was in our strategy meeting for the nursery yesterday, when I was listening to our new manager delivering her proposals to us, and it was based upon, we've got this beautiful experience throughout the whole of Rotorua, and then we've got the nursery, and all of those plants come through that nursery, yet we're not taking the opportunity to link them together. So yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Ms Rothwell. That's a really good point, actually, and we'll raise that with our comms team as well to see if we can get them across to share some of those great stories. Right. Thank you very much. We have Councillor Rotorua, followed by Councillor Maxwell.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I think there's some good work that's being done in the area of training with MSD and what you're doing there, but I really would like to see that scaled up. I mean, we've got 2 positions there for 9 months, and there's no guarantee at the end that people will get jobs out of it. And that does worry me, because training is one thing, but it's actually people being able to go into permanent positions afterwards. So we have an opportunity, I believe, to actually look at that as well. And I'm not sure if you're actually doing that or just doing the training and they take it, it's a bit of a hit and miss after 9 months. If they get a position with us or they move on to somewhere else and we just assist them to develop a CV and put that out there. So, I mean, I've seen it for years, the training programs that come and go, and we get the advantage of having people with us for some time, and but obviously they get skills enhancement and everything. But what are we actually doing to ensure that we can get some figures in there, because we know the unemployment statistics in Rotorua, and I believe that we can do so much more. And that's what I'm not content with just 2. And if you want to be a social enterprise, then you do know what a social enterprise is. I certainly know what one is. And I want to make sure that we're not lulling ourselves into a false sense of security. So we've got 2 training positions, and that's great. We have to upscale and leverage up as soon as possible to get to make an impression on the numbers that we've got in Rotorua. So I'm just asking if you're actually thinking wide enough in this area, because it does need something else, I believe.
Yeah, look, we are very much aligned. 2 people isn't my aspiration. 2 people is a start. Ultimately, the opportunities come by having more work. Work leads to employment. The way, I guess, the best way to articulate that is that, for Infracore to win more work, or any business, any contracting business to win more work, then they need to be able to demonstrate that they're running efficiently and effectively. The purpose of the business optimisation programme is to demonstrate that there is continuous improvement in this business. We're continuing to drive down the costs. We're continuing to drive up the efficiencies. That's the formula that leads to being awarded more work, whether it's through council or outside of council. Once we're awarded more work, then we need people to fill the positions in order to deliver it. So you're absolutely right. it isn't just about bringing people in for a period of time and giving them a CV. The ultimate aim is to keep them in full-time employment, and that's certainly what we're striving for. They need to work in collaboration with each other, those two initiatives, but they're also independent in that we can't not start the training piece without or until we've been awarded further work, you know.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Then I just believe that using the term a social enterprise or social good is actually a misnomer.
I think you're doing some great work there, Matt. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Matt. Actually, my one is along similar lines in the sense of the partnership delivering social good, and I just want to, I read with interest here and say that was wonderful with the initiative of taking a delegation to Waikuria. I know that here in Rotorua we have groups, Israel Hawkins and Billy McFarlane and various ones who are doing programs from people who end up coming from there. I thought that was tremendous, and you felt it also was an extremely passionate affair they provided. The question I have is, did we have an appropriate response to them from the delegation that went? Because we have very competent staff under your wing.
Yeah, I mean, it's that whole experience for me is humbling. We were well received, and my staff that I took with me were very engaged in it and have played an active role in that whole piece. So.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. Matt, firstly, can I just say great work by the crew who are doing the plantings at the lakefront. It's looking stunning down there. But my question is on page 16 regarding the operational achievement 5 months into delivering the land treatment system to Trility.
Yes.
I don't fully understand the second sentence in that paragraph. Reporting structures and KPIs are in place, supported by dashboard reporting. So are Trility reporting to Infracore or vice versa? How's that happening?
Us reporting to Trility. There's in the contractual terms, there's certain conditions, KPIs, hours worked, etc., etc. All of that data is captured by our workflow management system, presented in Power BI dashboards, which is then in turn presented to the client to give them real-time visibility of what we're doing, ultimately.
And just a supplementary, if I can, Madam Chair, when's the handover complete of the land treatment system to Trility?
We're working to Trility to deliver the land treatment or the forest area.
Now I completely understand.
Yeah,
right,
underneath.
So you're continuing to operate it as a subcontractor?
Correct, yeah.
Ka pai. Thank you.
Thank you. Your Worship, did you have a question?
Just a question, just a comment that Councillor Bentley made and a question through to you. I've passed one complaint through from customer service, only one, about the state of the cleanliness in the inner city, but it turned out to be a boundary issue between the landowner and what our Infracore staff are actually contracted to clean. But the majority of the comments that I receive are how beautiful Rotorua is looking, and I wanted to pass that on. So we do need to look at the contract overlap of landowners, you know, where does their responsibility lie, or building owners, and also the Infracore contract. So I'd love you to look at that.
Absolutely.
Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kia ora, Matt. Thank you so much for this presentation. I would agree as well that you're doing a really great job. I'd definitely like to see more of our young people trained up as well and taken through this process to upskill our people, but also give our rangatahi more opportunities locally as well. My question was, Regarding the contract with MSD, I know that Infracore, you guys were taking on other staff prior to this as well, and I know Ms. Trumper and I met a few of them out doing some vegetation control. Will that still be carrying on, or will that kind of work in collaboration with this contract?
This has spawned from that work piece, I guess. The vegetation control program was through council, but from COVID-19 recovery funding. I would dearly love to think that it would continue, and Infracore would be absolutely delighted to play an active role in that. But that's really funding specific. Yeah, but the MSD contract is spawned from that.
Great, and we have a final question from Councillor Okawate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's just that I sat here and I just wondered if we have an opportunity to attend Noho Marae, that's as councillors, and I'm just wondering if that invitation extended to our CCOs, because I think it would be helpful to them. So I'm just wondered if that's the case. I'm not sure if you even know what that means, but I don't know. Probably not.
Are you referring to the board of the CCOs?
It's for the board and actually particularly some of their senior staff as well. Not, it was just, I just thought about it.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Councillor Okawate.
Well, I just thought about it because I just hear that you'd attended Waikuria and you'd seen things there that had impact, you know, you thought about it, and I thought, well, just wondered if it might have been a suggestion that they could attend at some stage, because I think it would be quite helpful.
Thank you very much. I'm already getting a few nods, and we definitely could. So we'll put that on the to-do list to investigate and invite them. Thank you very much, Councillor Okawate. Thank you very much, Matt, for coming along. And I did also want to highlight how pleased I was to see in the report that the Infracore is in the strongest financial position that you have ever been in. And that is a huge milestone against the challenging times that we are facing. So thank you very much for your leadership. Thank you to your board, and thank you, of course, to all of the very hardworking staff behind you. And lastly, a warm welcome once again to Jeff Rolliston, who is the newest director on the board as well. Thank you. Excellent. So we'd now like to move on and invite Andrew Wilson to the table to speak to his presentation for Rotorua Economic Development Limited, and we are on page 23.
Kia ora koutou. I don't have a presentation, so I will keep a couple of comments pretty brief and then open for questions. So I'll take the report as read. There are just a couple of things that would be useful to highlight. Certainly the work that we've been doing around land availability is starting to move along at some more positive pace. So hopeful that we'll be able to come back to council in the near future with some better news around how we're progressing in terms of residential and development, but also commercial and industrial land. The other couple of things are just useful to touch on, that we've been doing quite a lot of work in terms of just reorientating brand Rotorua. So certainly there's been a lot of engagement with Te Aroha in particular over the last sort of 6 months. And we're getting close to now making available a more sort of coherent kind of brand playbook that would be available for not just tourism, but obviously right across, whether it's live, work, study, do business, invest, which will be a significant milestone. Alongside that, we're also just in the final steps of creating a brand campaign for Rotorua. Again, it's not a tourism campaign. This is very much orientated around showcasing our people and our stories. And so I look forward to extending an invite to some kind of launch for that in the near future. But I'll keep comments sort of finished there, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Your worship to me.
Thank you for your work, Andrew. I'm very aware of how joined up the work of RED is now with some of the challenges that we're facing as a council. But the issue that comes back to me frequently is about Air New Zealand connectivity. We have several people now that we're in that post-COVID, and we're not out of it yet. but saying to go to do business in Wellington, and it's not easy to do a Zoom day meeting, that they've actually, the connectivity of flights is not serving our community well. And I was concerned to also hear that facilities that we really value, like the National Fire Training Centre, because of the connectivity, is unsure of whether it should still be here. So I think we need to have another approach. I tried to get to Queenstown to have an approach about Air New Zealand connectivity, and I couldn't get there because of the flights. But I do think we need another concerted strategy here. It's not, we're out of that COVID recovery, but it's making it very hard for that connection with those of us that do have to go to Wellington, and the route you have to go is absurd, and the imposition on local businesses and government agencies is a challenge. So I'd urge us to look at that collectively, and I can't help think the best way to do it is to invite the Air New Zealand board here and take them on a famille and let them see, you know, we've got the great terminal, we've got our investment sitting there, we need the linkage with flights.
I'll let Mark talk to the schedules, and I know some of the difficulty in New Zealand have had around cancellations, so he can undoubtedly cover that off in his presentation. When we did catch up with Ruben, who is their kind of government affairs person, probably going back a couple of weeks, we certainly did raise the possibility of their board coming through and hosting them. So we'll certainly pick that up and make sure that we make that a priority over the next sort of few months.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, just two questions. With regard to the P&L on page 30, you indicated doubtful debts at a certain level. It's not that significant, but are these bad debts and have they been written off?
Yes, they are bad debts, and yes, they have been written off. They associated with some tourism providers who had purchased services from us that are no longer in operation.
Thank you, that's clear. Second question, if I may. In the same P&L, you list the MSD wage subsidy separately from other income. I wondered if that could have been placed up amongst the revenues.
Yeah, look, it certainly could have, but it was literally just from an accounting perspective. We've looked to keep that separate, so it's clearly identifiable from an audit perspective.
Yeah, it's just technically it's a form of revenue.
Yeah.
But apart from that, thank you very much. Interesting report. Kia ora.
Thank you. Were there any other questions for Andrew? Yes, Mr. Hurd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Andrew, I'm probably stepping outside the parameters a little bit, but I've got a question about the paradigm, I'll call it a paradigm, that we've lived in Rotorua for probably over a century, where we've been the international centre of Māori culture and geothermal tourism. And I'm just wondering, post-COVID, with a changing world and international travel, constraint on travel through sustainability and climate change issues, that it may be time to think about that a little bit and think if that is actually the frame within which we need to see our city moving forward, or whether there's another set of frames we need to consider. I don't know what those might be, but there's things suggest themselves. But has that kind of thought been processed within the group?
Yeah, but it's probably a conversation we could spend a couple of hours on, would be the really short answer, actually. Look, I think fundamentally this is the Te Arawa culture and geothermal will continue to be a really core strength of our brand proposition. We've done quite a lot of work in terms of that brand piece that I mentioned earlier that does round that out with a couple of other aspects, so there's kind of three components to it. I'd be happy to sort of come back and probably talk to that separately, or at the next time we can give a more full presentation on that. I think that at the moment the other observation to make is when we think about our tourism sector in particular, a lot of our it's really a kind of tale of two cities almost. So we've got some businesses that have been doing exceedingly well. Certainly talking with some businesses, they've had their best kind of Aprils and Mays ever. Some of them have been trading very profitably. On the other hand, we've got some that have been absolutely decimated and are doing it incredibly tough. And certainly a lot of our really key Māori tourism businesses have certainly struggled. That's discussions we've been having with central government in particular around what additional support can be provided, and not support for here and now, but actually support thinking about what shape do those businesses need to be in, thinking out sort of 5 to 10 years. And I think that's really where where our kind of focus is at the moment, is just making sure that we can kind of lift people up to have enough headspace to be able to think about those kind of longer term questions. So I know that doesn't quite answer your question, Bryce, but hopefully that gives you a bit of a feel for where we're at.
Thank you. Your Worship, the Mayor.
This morning, a couple of us attended the Te Puni Kōkiri breakfast with ministers in town, and they're having a meeting as we speak about the future of Māori tourism. And so we've got the right players in the room with the right people that need to listen. So I think there is a potential about the work that you're doing in the destination management plan, Andrew, that weaves into that discussion as well. Can you tell us where you're at with the destination management plan?
Yep, happy to give you an update on that. So look, that's been progressing along really well. We've had a lot of engagement across a lot of different community entities. We've completed a piece of work that looked at the core issues. We've worked through and identified a vision and a set of values, and we're now forming up collectively a set of strategic directions, focus areas, and then a set of actions. Monday, Tuesday this week, we actually spent in Wellington, so we spent some time with New Zealand Māori and Tourism New Zealand, TPK, and Rauri very kindly gave up some of his time to attend a hui we had with MB, TIA, and a variety of other entities. I think it was a very constructive hui, and I think they heard very clearly what the kind of the issues are. I think there's been a clear sense and a clear understanding that the issues we face as a destination are a bit different to those that are faced in other locations around the country. And I think the good news was, I think there was a willingness to kind of walk alongside us in terms of, as we start to identify what those actions are, to kind of get them behind and help us to get them across the line or deliver upon them.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Andrew. I'm just looking at page 25, investment and development, and just the various discussions and information on that page. At the, or as these, and I appreciate the work you're doing in the background regarding facilitating discussions and commercial investments coming into Rotorua, but at the end of the day, who's counting the jobs that are being created? How many jobs are being created by this investment, and who keeps a track of that? Is that your responsibility, or have you taken that on board? Because we hear some pretty scary numbers about job seekers who are out there.
From memory, the counting the jobs associated with those particular PGF developments is done in council as part of the strategy team. So I think it's part of that kind of benefits realisation piece. So there is a reporting that's kind of programmed in, was my understanding, to go back on that. I'm just trying to recall. Certainly, it is the other area we're really focused on in terms of where else can we be pushing projects that are going to create meaningful numbers of jobs. I think on that job front, it's been fascinating to be speaking with some of even the tourism operators who are kind of crying out for workers at the moment and really struggling to fill roles. And so there is potentially a bit of a disconnect at the moment between, on one hand, we've seen unemployment rise and we've seen the number of job seekers rise, but we've got businesses that are really struggling for people. So quite what that disconnect is something that we need to get our heads around and understand. I think some of the ideas we need to think a little bit differently around, how we're actually ensuring that people are job ready and are getting into those roles. So that's certainly a focus at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Yates.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. Nei rā te mihi ki a koe, Andrew. My question is around the place brand, and given that we've had the elements that have been in play for a little while, and I feel COVID almost destroyed the potential that those elements had for telling our story, where will these fit moving forward?
Yeah, look, Elements was a campaign in reality, so we'll be looking to park that to one side, and we'll be looking to relaunch with a more sort of coherent kind of overall brand proposition that campaigns will sit underneath. Interestingly, I think Elements does kind of still fit within our brand campaign, but it is missing a bit of a perspective around our people, and that's the piece that we're really trying to bring through very strongly.
Thank you. Were there any other questions? Yes, Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Andrew. My question really was centred around the travel bubble with Australia, and I don't think I did see it mentioned in the report, but could you please give us an update on how that's going and what marketing Rotorua Red's doing with Tourism New Zealand, trying to grab as many Aussies as we can?
Yeah, so certainly the Australian bubble, we were always fairly realistic that it was going to be a slow burn. So there was never going to be a flood of Australians turning up on day one. Interestingly, though, I think at 8 a.m. on the day the bubble did open, we did have some Australian visitors through the eyesight that very morning. So it's nice to be proven wrong. Bookings are starting to pick up realistically when you're kind of getting later into the year. So talking with some of the accommodation providers and operators, they're starting to see that build. Our view was always more likely it was going to be over that kind of summer period that would start to see greater volumes in it. And I think it's the psychology. If you think about your own kind of whānau and friends, how many of them have gone and booked a trip to Australia? And most people are taking a bit of a cautionary approach to say, yeah, it's maybe on the radar, but let's just wait to see how this kind of plays out in terms of border closures and so forth. So optimistic later in the year. In terms of the marketing effort, we again didn't want to kind of go too early, so to speak, but we are attending, I think we'll be sending someone to Australia in July, which will be our first kind of foray over there. That's to connect again with those kind of travel wholesalers and retailers. So the travel market in Australia works a little bit differently in terms of a lot of people still go to a travel agent to book their travel, which isn't necessarily the normal kind of model over here in New Zealand. And so we'll be making sure that we're kind of getting in front of those before taking a group of operators back across probably September, October, I'd imagine, on a bit of a roadshow at that point. We do have some campaign activity lined up. It's sort of pretty targeted in terms of going after niche groups, and we'll look to provide an update on that when we provide our next quarterly report.
Thank you. Last question from Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Andrew. My one is following on from how we're promoting and marketing in Australia. We got a great boost last night with the Breakers and the Taipans game down there in Rotorua. It was brilliant the whole evening, and starting off in a very strong and powerful way with the Maori Cultural Group coming out from Boys and Girls High School. Great start. Aussie Modena liked the fact that we beat them, but that's what happens. The winners are grinners, but a strong promo started last night. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew. We'd now move to Rotorua Airport Limited, and I'd like to invite Chief Executive Mark Gibb to speak to his presentation. And we are on page 34.
Kia ora, everyone. Look, thank you for having me again. What I'd like to do is just briefly run through a presentation, just picking out the key highlights for us over the last 3 months and giving you a line of sight into what lies ahead for us over the next 6. In terms of the content of the presentation, just looking to give you an update as at I'm actually wondering if this is the correct presentation. I think the team may have loaded the wrong one. I'm in Q3, not Q2.
We'll just take a minute to see
Thank
if
you
we can
very
find
much.
the Q3
It's a
one.
bit like Groundhog Day, actually.
In just a minute.
Thank you.
We've got a question from Her Worship the Mayor in the meantime.
Really, it's a comment that while they're loading, we just loved having the Air Force here, and congratulations. And that operation, what was it called? Wiser, was fantastic, and the public, our community, just loved it. And they actually felt part of the airport. And it was great, and it did raise the issue for me, Mark, have we got the potential for a training centre here? Because they loved the use of the lounge space that you made for them.
Yes, thank you very much. Look, it was a wonderful event for the city. We had, in context, over 2 weeks, we had around 80 personnel from the Air Force in. So there was a number of pilots, trainee pilots and their support crew. Their full fire team and the head of the Air Force actually came through last week. He was incredibly impressed with what Rotorua turned on for them in terms of the facilities at the airport and more broadly the city. My sense is there's a huge opportunity for the airport to take advantage of events like this and certainly flight training schools into the future. One of the keys from an Air Force perspective is the safety net, is the nature of the aeronautical facilities, the runway, etc. And we're blessed to have over the years have invested heavily in that. So we're really a step ahead of a number of other airports in terms of what we can do with the likes of the Air Force. So yes, coming out the back of it, I think there's probably a shared view that there is a big opportunity for us.
Hey Mark, I might just suggest we could just hold 10 on your presentation while we get it loaded, because we understand you probably have put a lot of work into it and would love to see it. And we might in the meantime just switch over to our financial performance. So we'll take that on our agenda and then return to you in about 10 minutes. Thank you, sorry about that. So I'd now like to welcome Thomas Colley to the table. I'd ask for a mover and a seconder to receive the report, financial performance for the 10 months ended 30th of April. Moved Mr Waru, seconded Councillor Yates. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carried. Thank you very much. Welcome, Thomas.
Good morning, Madam Chair, and good morning, councillors and board members. Financial update for the 10 months ended April 2021. So, from a financial perspective and an operating result, we did take a little bit of a hit to our favourable variance that we've been reporting to date. So we did have about $500,000 disappear off that. That is off the back of the money and investment into the inner city safety and security and into the housing projects, with all other activities coming in on or close to budget. So the overall result itself is again incredibly consistent with all the previous months, other than that favourable variance reducing. So more operating expenditure with regards to responding to demands and community needs, with the majority of that, if not all of it, being offset by additional revenues as well. And just a reminder that the budget that we are reporting against is that stretch target, and so the budget that we're reporting is approximately well over $1 million ahead of the actual budget, and that was that stretch target that we put into our fees and charges. as you will recall, we did reduce that budget line item in our annual plan in response to COVID. So it's pleasing that we are still continuing to track well ahead of that. Not quite my presentation there, but that's fine. With regards to CapEx, still lagging a little bit behind budget. As we've talked before, there are a number of key projects that were deferred or just the timing changed, and so we do anticipate to be significantly underspent at the end of this year, with the majority of that expenditure already reflected in our draft long-term plan, kicking in next year. With regards to the investment into the renewal of our infrastructure, an incredibly high completion rate, with the majority of that work being completed or has been completed, with just a few little projects left, and obviously a significant amount of work still underway on the lakefront, the Performing Arts Centre, the Aquatic Centre, and a number of other projects as well. As a result of that projected underspend in our capital works program, we are anticipating that our end-of-year debt position to be about 40 million less than planned. You'll see there in April that our debt did jump up substantially at the end of the month, and that was pre-funding a $20 million maturity. So we had $20 million of refinancing to do in May. So what we like to do is just get ahead of that and pre-fund that and have it available so that when it does mature, we have those funds available and repay that. So our debt now has dropped back by that 20 million and is sitting closer to 226 million at the moment as we speak. It is projected to increase slightly over the coming months, with a number of those capital projects such as the Performing Arts Centre and Lakefront progressing and drawing on more debt, but it will not achieve or hit the 276 million that was planned in our budgets. So overall, the operating result is still broadly on budget. Like I said, it is that stretch target. The CapEx is broadly in line with those projects that we know were deferred or timing challenges, with the bulk of the rest of the program well underway. Debt is heading in the right trajectory in light of particularly those others. And where we do expect to be at the end of the year is, I am now expecting the pressures with regards to the investment into the housing and city safety likely will pull our operating result back. We still hope that we will end the year on budget, but we're not now likely to end the year as favourable as we were projecting before. CapEx we expect to be behind budget with regards to not so much the renewals, high completion rate, but just those key projects that were deferred and had timing changes on. And as a result, we do anticipate our debt to be approximately 40 million less than planned. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Thomas. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Through you, Chair. The questions, I can leave those because you've covered them. When you look forward to page 43, the CapEx for the 10 months, the remaining components of unspent CapEx, I wondered to what extent can the remaining budgets of 30 million in arts and culture and 12 million in sports, rec and the environment, could they be retained or expenditure deferred to help reduce their current debt, which you've just revised, and that's very helpful.
Yep,
and more broadly, what other debt reduction tactics are being considered? Thank you.
So those items that you highlighted are tied to obviously projects such as the Performing Arts Centre that started late in the year, and obviously the museum, which is about to kick off. So they're underspent because of deferment and are projected to kick into gear significantly over the coming period. So it's just a deferment on the timing of the debt drawdown on those. You will recall during the LTP discussions as well that the strategy at the moment with regards to our financial strategy is to leverage debt with regards to the investment into our community. So as such, there is no strategy to reduce council's debt at the moment. The strategy is to leverage it to help grow our community.
Thank you. A supplementary, it's with regards to the intersection of your duties and that of the CCO. I notice in the airport report that there is the capacity for the airport CCO to investigate direct borrowings arrangements with LGFA. Do you have supervision of that, and at what point does the council have oversight and authorise such borrowings?
Council has the authorisation that is required. So any CCO is not able to borrow from the LGFA without council approval. And so that is a mechanism that is in place. So while the airport is working on that, and you'll recall that there was a paper with regards to, a confidential paper with regards to the approval of some borrowings in a business case. And so at the time that the airport is ready to borrow from the LGFA on that, it will come back to council with regards to formal approval.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Were there any other questions for Thomas? Mr. Waru.
Kia ora, morena tātou, and hope you received my apology text. Kia ora. Kia ora, Thomas, tēnā koe I tō reporter. I'm not too sure if this is the right place to ask, or the right section to ask, it's just around the museum. So, how confident are you that the final number that they've put on the museum is going to be that number? You can push me to another section if you want. I'm not too sure if it was right for this.
I think if the Chief Executive wishes to answer, or...
ka pai, kai te whakarongo.
I think what I can answer is that I've got total confidence that due diligence has been exercised as much as possible for the assessment as to what the museum project will cost. So we've had the best people looking at the likely scenarios and extrapolating what the likely cost is. What you can never predict, though, is what is unpredictable. And so given that this is an old building, it's a building that is exceedingly complex, it's on some of the most challenging ground conditions in Rotorua, all of these things have been taken into account in the assessment, but you can never be 100% confident that that final figure is exactly the final figure.
Okay, I'll leave it at that. I was going to ask an answer. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Were there any other questions? There appear to be none. Thank you very much, Thomas. I'd like to welcome back Mark. Thank you very much for your patience. We have the right presentation and would like to invite you back to speak to your presentation. And on our agenda, we are on page 34. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So just picking up where I left off, so I'll cover off 4 key areas. Firstly, from a performance perspective, where we've landed 31 March. Secondly, give you an update with respect to airways and the continuation of air traffic control services for the city. Thirdly, looking more broadly at the overarching operational and commercial achievements of the company. And again, finishing off with the Q4 position and future actions. So to have a look into where we're sitting currently 9 months into the year, we're holding a net surplus of just over $1.1 million versus a budget of $571,000. That's extensively driven through a better than forecast revenue position. And if you drop down to the third point there, you'll see the reason why we'd budgeted 96,000 passengers through to 31 March. We've exceeded that at 125,000. Which is positive. And again, if you look out into the month of April, to get an optic around that, we're at about 19,200 passengers versus our best ever target, a best ever number, sorry, of around about 22,000. So we had an exceptionally good month over April. And that coincided with a number of tourists into the city in and around the school holiday period. So yeah, just to wrap that out, that's we're basically ahead of the forecast on revenue, and again we're managing expenses below budget. Below the line, though, if you apply depreciation, and from an airport's perspective, depreciation is a significant number for us. This year we're forecast to carry around about $2.2 million in depreciation, and that's ostensibly driven off the significant investment we have in and around the runway and aeronautical assets. As that flags up, a loss of 751,000 versus budget of 1.3 million. It's likely, if you extrapolate that to a year-end position, there'll be a loss post-depreciation of around $1 million, but pre-depreciation we will remain cash positive. I've covered off the passenger numbers. Just the last item to briefly touch on there is aircraft movements. We have seen an upgauging on several Air New Zealand services. So what that means is typically where they may have run a Q300 aircraft, they've flipped into an ATR. The difference in seating capacity is a Q300 would be 52 seats and ATR is around 72. So where demand has driven it, we've seen larger aircraft operating, but the frequency has been slightly less. So that has had an impact on aircraft movements. But the sense is through April, May, as we will start to see the actual number of aircraft movements coinciding more closely with budget. In respect to the tower, so we have the Civil Aviation Authority at the airport today. They've been there yesterday also, and they're conducting an audit with the Airways team within the tower itself. So we're coming towards the back end of that process. Just to recap on where we got to, the completion of the aeronautical study by the airport was quite unanimous in the position that air traffic control could not be removed, and if it was removed there would be a detrimental impact on safety in and around operation of aircraft, and also it would affect us volumetrically in terms of the number of aircraft we can actually manage into the airspace at any one time. I would be hopeful that we will have a decision out on that within the next month. Looking into key achievements over Q3, a number of things are happening as we sort of re-emerge out the back end of COVID. As was briefly touched on under the last presentation, we have 5 strategic projects we're currently pushing through at the present time, which cover a range of opportunities in the airport, from general aviation, rotary, in-terminal retail, a broader training presence across the airport, and looking at an initiative around bringing in jet services into the city. All those are advancing well, and we'll look to take a number of those up through business case at our board meeting on the 24th of June. Aeronautical charges review. Every 5 years we review our aeronautical charges with Air New Zealand and other users. We believe there will be some positive movement in those, and the benefit of a positive movement in aeronautical charges from our perspective ultimately means that we can pull levers to either repay debt quickly and more effectively, or alternatively reduce the reliance on council's subsidy into the company. So once we get through those negotiations, it provides a wonderful opportunity to work with Council's management team and the CFO in and around how those savings are best applied for the benefit of the company and the shareholder. We've opened appearance room and meeting room in the terminal, just again as part of the process to really try and enhance the customer service offering for people utilising the airport. They've both been taken up really well. We've published the autumn edition of Haere Mai magazine. Again, there's some really good stuff in there. One of the big initiatives that I think I may have touched on briefly previously was the restoration of the carvings that did adorn the outside of the building. They've been now fitted into either end of the walkway, and we've worked quite extensively with the original carvers and Ngāti Kapako in and around telling the story that those carvings reflect. And that's providing a real point of interest for people coming into the terminal, and just provides a richness, I suppose, around differentiation of our airport relative to others. So I'm really pleased with that outcome, and that is touched on in the magazine, which is available both digitally and in hard copy. As noted, we've had a really good surge in passenger numbers over April. My sense is through May and June we may see that drop back slightly as we move off the shoulder of summer into the depths of winter. But typically speaking, May, June, July are always the quieter months for us before we start picking back up into the spring and summer. And the last issue is we had WorkSafe in at the airport around 3 months ago. They undertook quite an extensive audit over a number of the things that we do. It came out with a positive tick. In actual fact, they were looking to use us as an exemplar around a number of our programs on airside driving and a number of other things we do in terms of generally driving and managing safety across the airport. That image in the middle was actually a couple of our fire crew working with the NZ Air Force. And I'll briefly touch on that. The opportunity to having Wiseal here for 2 weeks provided a whole series of operational cross-training options for us. So the Air Force fire crews, together with our own crews and medical teams, basically lived and worked out of our Emergency Operations Centre for 2 weeks, which was a wonderful learning experience for our team and for the team within the Air Force also. So that was one of the I suppose the semi-attached benefits of having the Air Force here operating aircraft out of the airport. If I look at future actions rolling to Q4, again, we've got a lot on. One thing, as we have flagged up over the last 3 presentations in and amongst COVID, is we took a view that that we would look to fight our way out the back end of COVID and look to accelerate positively with a strong set of projects to drive our recovery and growth in revenues. Off that, there's a number of things happening. Firstly, we're working actively internally and we're starting to work externally with Council in and around understanding where our future debt profiles sit, our operational revenue profiles sit, with a view to trying to optimise, because any money that the airport can save, obviously there's a beneficial saving to the shareholder in doing that. The strategic projects moving through feasibility to business case approval, and again there's some really exciting things that we hope to bring forward as part of that. The aeronautical charges review, we hope to have that a long way down the track by the end of June, July, and those charges will take effect in Q3 this year. We've actually held Wiseal now, so I've canvassed the benefits of that exercise. Again, from a general GDP perspective, you know, the people that were here put a lot of money into the city. They stayed in accommodation, they were out each night spending money in food and beverage, etc. So a really good little benefit and win-win for the entire city out of that. The board, we're holding a strategy day 25th of June, and that's designed to really take very much a forward-looking view on how we again look to continue to accelerate our growth and diversification of income. Ride the Runway date, unbelievably that's coming up again, so we'll be working with the Bike Festival to land a date on that. And again, that just seems to go from bigger to bigger to bigger each year we hold it. And the last is Property Council Awards. So the terminal has been shortlisted as one of 8 nominees under the Property Council Awards, which are really the preeminent property awards within New Zealand under the tourism and leisure category, and they're being judged in Auckland on the 20th of August. The key message that's come out of that when we've had the judges through is it's not around who spent the most money and who built the biggest building. It was around a sensible utilisation of funding, the outcome that we had for our spend. You know, and we've been quite forward in our view that we have spent well under any other regional airport redevelopment across New Zealand, just over $5 million. But our firm view is we've got a way better a way better outcome than the majority of those airports that have spent significantly more than we have. So we're very happy with it, and again we're continuing to tune it to ensure it really enhances a customer experience for us. Just to round out on that, sorry the text is a wee bit small here, but there's a number of social media posts that the Air Force placed through the course of their time here. There's some wonderful photography that was put in place when we weren't fighting fog and rain on those beautiful evenings we had. A few of the Texans working over the lake. The middle image is part of our operational kit with the Air Force kit that came up from Ohakia to the airport for the period of 2 weeks, and then out to the right is a number of the pilots and air crew that were stationed here for the period of 2 weeks. But that closes the presentation. Very happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Your worship, the Mayor.
A question. Well done with the findings of the aeronautical study. It sort of quite endorses our decision to invest in getting that done. When are you expecting a response from Airways?
Yes, so the position that Airways took through the study is they chose not to consult as part of the process we ran. The back end of that process is the Director of Civil Aviation undertakes his own review of the study, and we understand Airways have inputted into that, so we will get a copy of Airways feedback over the next few weeks. Airways outside of the aeronautical study are looking at a fundamental change in their model of service delivery, so they are out to consultation at the present time, in which they're looking to move the point of cost recovery from the airline customer to the airports. So this is not news to us, as we've sort of, we've seen this behaviour building for a number of months now. So yeah, there's a lot going on in that space, and I think a number of the organisations that are involved in aviation in New Zealand are fighting for cost recovery at the moment. Everyone is under a degree of pressure, and it's likely that we will see some degree of cost reset out of Airways. Our objective out of it at the end of the day, though, was simply to say that it's not about the money, it's about safety here, and the continuity of service that served the city very well over the last 70 years the airport's been in existence simply should not go.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson, followed by Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I note, Mark, on page 36, there is a sketch. It's a bit hard to read, but it does indicate fairly massive development of land as you look at the entrance off to the left, down behind the hangars, down behind the choppers. And on page 37, you set out 5 strategic initiatives, and you indicate what these projects comprise. Has this piece of thinking replaced that of previous years when there was talk of the commercialisation of the land? Are these the developments that have replaced that thinking?
No, I think, look, the overarching vision and objectives that are laid out within the airport master plan remain consistent. The first tranche of strategic projects is really the first step on the pathway towards realisation of that master plan. So if we look at them, an area we call Precinct B, which is a general aviation precinct, which is to the northern end of the tower. We have the first hangar prepared to go into there. The heliport, which sits within Precinct A, again, we have a development set to go into there. The fire training school sits in an area, Precinct C, which is on the far side of the airfield. So I think you will see that these projects become the entree to bigger and better things going forward. And we're consistently now looking at other opportunities across the airport's land body to bring development forward.
My supplementary, if I may, thank you, Chair, is that the 25th June, Airport Strategy Day. You'll provide details and perhaps an invitation?
It's not an external day, Councillor. That's a day for the board to operate within the framework of their governance responsibilities as directors of the company. So at this stage, we're not looking to externalise that. The only externalisation that may occur would be through an independent external facilitator, Anne Patello, that we're looking to bring on board. And we're also looking to have a component of that day that looks in and around mana whenua values through Ngāti Unico Kapako, in terms of having a conversation in and around their value set, history of the Roe, and just trying to contextualise how we move forward with that day. But at this point, it's not an open forum.
Thank you.
I'm sorry to hear that. But anyway, thanks very much.
It's understandable. Thank you. Councillor Maxwell.
Kia ora, Chair. Thank you, Mark. Good report and good luck with the awards in Auckland. The question I have is, with that flight training school in Hamilton now closed, and we were providing other options in that, have they moved to another centre or is this just temporary?
Yes, of all places, we understand they've gone to Portugal. So I couldn't tell you the reasoning in behind it. So the organisation that the councillor refers to is a company, CTCRL3. They had a very significant presence in Hamilton. They had wonderful facilities there in which they were training pilots globally in through Asia, India, Europe, and into New Zealand, Australia. So they've taken a view that they were looking to centralise that function back up into Europe. So they shut that facility around April. The opportunity within New Zealand is still very significant in terms of flight training. So we still have Massey, we have Ardmore, we have a number of other organisations. The opportunity for Rotorua, though, is twofold. Firstly, we will continue to try and secure an external flight school to come into the city. Secondly, because of the demise of L3, the training for pilots locally will drop back to aero clubs. So the opportunity for us to really work with the Aero Club to see the surge in growth they're getting through a lot of groups they call the Young Eagles, which are the young people that are coming up through that organisation. We believe provides a huge opportunity for them to provide flight training opportunities in and around the Aero Club here. So that is a pivotal piece of the construction of the General Aviation Precinct for us. It's a bit like the clubhouse on a golf course. Once you get this in place, it becomes the gathering place, it becomes the centrepiece for the growth and function of the General Aviation Precinct. So that's a real priority for us to get that up, and that will tick the box in terms of flight training for the city in the first instance.
Thank you. Ms Bray.
Kia ora, Mark. Not a question, but congratulations on installing an ATM machine out there for customers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson, followed by Councillor Yates.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Mark. My question is on page 38 regarding the company updating its airport bylaws, and I wasn't actually aware that the company created any bylaws for a start. So I know the steps that council has to follow to put a bylaw in place or amend one. So are they put in place by the company or AVSEC or some other entity? And where do you find them? Are they on your website?
Yes, thank you. So, Councillor, the reason we have the bylaws is, for example, if I looked at internal roads, we have speed restrictions on them that are generally 20 to 30 kilometres an hour. As an organisation, we have to invoke trespass orders at certain points in time. So the bylaws provide the company with a degree of steel to ensure we can take those actions. If there's a parking fine, that we have legality around pursuing that. So the first tranche of that was to draft the bylaws, which we've now completed. The second step is to work through HOBEX solicitors in and around how we implement in a legally compliant manner. So we're just at that juncture of moving into that phase of work, but absolutely understand the complexity of getting these in place. They are quite typical for airports having their own sets of bylaws.
Thank you. Councillor Yates.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, tēnā koe, Mark. It's a great report. Thank you so much for that. I actually have a couple of questions. So my first one actually goes back to March when I questioned some of the reo rua opportunities there and the correction of some of the names. Has that been corrected? I haven't been out there since March.
Well, yes, it has. So a number of the sign boxes have been updated and corrected. So I would be hopeful that everything has been completed. Yes, but please let me know if we're not quite there.
Thank you. Second question is around flight options and opportunities, and whilst in New Zealand, and I'm aware, I just had to clarify with Councillor Kaifong, I'm aware Jetstar lost the opportunity or chose not to take on the opportunity to come to fly into Rotorua. Is there any other opportunity to look at that, given that we are struggling with flights and sometimes cancellations, which then delay us attending meetings and so forth? So is there any opportunity to open up that conversation again?
Yes, there was. So I think it was briefly touched on in Andrew's presentation. So we have, as part of our strategic approach, we have a network development plan. And the network development plan has 10 pillars. Now, a couple of the critical ones in there relate to the reinstatement and rebalancing of the network pre-COVID. So two of the critical issues that we're working on at the moment is reinstatement of the Christchurch and the Auckland Red Eyes. At the moment, we receive flights in around 9:30 from those centres, but it becomes very difficult for business travellers to actually leave if you're going elsewhere. So there's a piece in around reinstatement. There's a piece in around looking at other sectors and other routes. And we call those Tier 2 connections, and that could be a connection from Rotorua to one of the smaller airports around the country. And also we have the issue around Queenstown, which has been on the agenda for some years now. And again, we've taken a slightly different view towards what we believe is a better and more sensible approach to reinstatement of that sector. So there's a number of things happening. We're continuing to have positive dialogue with Air New Zealand at the moment, in and around getting the schedules rebalanced. One of the issues they've had is they have had a number of technical problems with their Q300 fleet, so we have seen cancellations occurring, which are very frustrating for travellers at the last minute. In the main, they're occurring around the Q300s, and we've had a number of those over the last few weeks. But from what we're being told, is they're likely to see that come back in more of a balanced way. So yes, there is a lot happening out there. The positive thing in coming out the back of COVID is it's all bets are off to a degree, so it does provide an opportunity to clean sheet networks as opposed to just going back to what we were doing beforehand.
Thank you for that, and I'm really pleased to hear that as an opportunity, and also congratulations even on the numbers and thinking about May, June, July. We're into June right now. We've only got really another month before our market starts picking up again. Final question, which actually relates also to the Red brand and the Haramai magazine and around brand recognition. Is the airport working in collaboration with Red to look at our brand recognition moving forward?
Yes, we have. So we've been invited as part of the destination management plan to participate in that. So we're connected at the hip in and around that. The airport's a critical enabler of bringing the destination management plan to life. So absolutely, we're well centred in that process.
Thank you. Mr Waru, followed by Councillor McPherson.
Tēnā koe te te amana o te rā tātou katoa. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for the report. Good report as usual. Straight to the point and direct and giving us all the lowdown. That's the way I like it. Hoi anō. Te whaiwai noa kia ngā kōrero a te kaikau ni here nei a Mercia mo te taha ki te reo. So you did mention that had been a thing, and then you said, but do tell me if you have to. So I'm going to tell you. I would suggest probably if you want to make sure that it's all done properly. I see you've used anha in the translations for the kōrero e pāna ki ngā whakairo to the carvings. So I would suggest probably you might want to go and get him to have a quick look around. I was just there when I was over there, Andrew, yesterday. And yeah, there are a few things there, even in this picture. So, you know, he wāhi hui, harai te wāhu. Hui. So just little things that it could be just typos or something like that, but I think it's important to get right. Yep. So you might want to just get him to go through and do a look at everything in there. It won't take long. He's pretty quick and onto it. So kia ora, koina noho tāku. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kia ora. Last question from Councillor McPherson.
Thank you for the opportunity to supplement question, Mark. I've had a couple of questions recently from people. There's been a new taxi startup, and the way in which some of the taxis are being managed in terms of traffic flows and so on out at the airport has raised complaints, and I've deferred any involvement in that, and I'd appreciate a bit of a background on this. Thank you.
Certainly. So look, I'll tread lightly around this because it is ostensibly a commercial matter between the airport and taxi companies, and we are coming up towards a new tender process shortly, so I've just got to be very careful around not sort of trying to influence that in any way or form. But the critical issue here is around simply a position of fairness. So over the course of the last 12 months, the two incumbent taxi organisations with a lot of pressure have serviced the airport very well. You know, and to take you back, in April last year we had 4 passengers through. We've had a huge variation in passenger numbers over the course of the last 12 months. The positive thing with the taxi companies that have been in operation at the moment is they've continued to turn up and be available for passengers through the course of it. And there's points in time in which they come to the airport, they won't pick up passengers, they go back into the city. But they have taken a view that the service needs to be there if people require it. So from a reciprocal perspective, we've taken a view that as we re-emerge out of COVID and move towards a point of looking to re-tender taxi services October through December this year, that we need to do the right thing by the people that have done the right thing to us. And that is to ensure that their businesses can re-emerge and they can remain in business. And we've taken a view also as part of that, that it would be inappropriate in advance of a tender process to introduce another company in that could have a detrimental impact on the existing companies that are operating within the airport. So we've taken a measured view. We've got an open mind in terms of who will service the airport into the future, but we've been fair about it, I can absolutely assure you of that, and we will do the right thing for companies that have serviced our community for a number of years.
Very briefly, what is the tendering process about? Thank you.
The process we're yet to define, but ostensibly the way it would work is either through an expressions of interest or through another mechanism. We will go to market and invite interest from taxi or public transport providers to service the airport. The market today relative to where it was 4 to 5 years back is very different because back then it was simply 90% of the business through an airport, 95% was through hail. So effectively you'd walk out of the terminal, you would flag a taxi, you would jump at it and off you go. With Uber, with a number of app booking arrangements that are out there at the moment, there's a far wider number of operators in market, and that provides challenges for the airports, not only around the number of operators that are operating within the airport, but we have a responsibility also to ensure that the quality of the taxis, the quality of the service that's being offered, which for a lot of tourists coming to the city is their first point of connection, provides a quality service. So there's a number of things that are commercial, and there's a number of things in and around I'd refer to as manakitanga, okay, just how those people conduct themselves with customers that we need to weigh up. So the tender process from our perspective enables us to actually flesh that out and make sure we've got the right people offering the right services at the right time of the day.
Thank you. Your Worship, you wanted to add something?
I just want to add something, and you might be surprised, but thank you for putting that appropriately at the Council Committee table. We've all been lobbied quite heavily as councillors, and my response is that we have nothing to do with the tendering process, and I've referred it on to the Chief Executive, to Mark, rather than put ourselves in the middle of a commercial tendering process. But that's a good question to ask, and you mightn't expect me to say that.
Thank you. And final comment from Councillor Okawate.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Mark, I am a frequent flyer and use the terminal often, and I have to say it's a pleasure to arrive and leave from the terminal now. But I want to thank you for the addition for the parents' room and also the meeting room, particularly for our parents if they're travelling anywhere to settle little ones down or that sort of. So I want to thank you for that, but also for the meeting room, because I try to get out there now, but I'm never quite sure if I'm going to get held up on Tenai Road, and so sometimes we can actually start our preliminary discussions before we even get on the flight. So I really want to thank you for that addition, and I believe it will be well used when people know it's available. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. Well, that concludes the first half of our session today, and I'd like to take a break, and if we could please return in 15 minutes at 11:21. Members just rejoining us and jumping on their seats, but we'll kick back off. We are now into page 44. I ask for a mover and seconder to receive the report, operational report for April 2021 be received. Moved by Councillor Okawa-Tate, seconded by Mr Hurd. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried, thank you. Now I'd like to invite our Business Support Group Manager, Thomas Collet, up to the table. And we're on page 45, if anybody has any questions. Welcome, Thomas. Yes, Mr Hurd. Nope, we'll go through the different groups. So we'll just start on the business support group so while Thomas is here with us, it's any question that you may have from page 45. And then we'll go through to the different groups and ask questions as we have the managers present. Yes, Your Worship.
Clarification, I mean, I've got a question around the housing, emergency housing, but I don't expect Thomas to answer it. So we just wait?
Yes. So the usual process is we'll invite the group manager from each department up and then they will speak to their report. In this case, the report is in front of you, and if you had any questions on the annual report audit or the procurement, which are there, then please let us know. Otherwise, we will move on to the strategy group. Mr Hurd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just have a question around the Wood First policy. So I hope I'm in the right report.
No. Look, there appears to be
on
no questions
page
for
47.
Thomas. Thank you, Thomas. We'll move to the strategy group, which is on page 45 to 47.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Gotcha.
Yeah, no worries. JP is away today, but if you have any questions, then we'll find the appropriate staff member to answer. Yes, Your Worship.
I have a question about the next steps, and congratulations on the task force around emergency housing. So my question is probably, well, if JP's not here, Jeff, to you. This was a very exciting start and well done getting that task force here. My question is now, what do we focus on next? So while we have sorted the MSD and MHUD component of emergency housing, what's the task force going to focus on next?
We have next week visiting a number of chief executives of government agencies, and what the discussion with them will be regarding is what are the targets for Rotorua that are needed from the point of view of commercial housing, social housing, transitional housing and emergency housing, and then looking to agree a mechanism by which we can work effectively together to achieve those targets. So that's where we are immediately at the moment. That said, there is a lot of work going on with the government agencies even prior to that meeting. So there's work that JP's team has got underway at the moment and is referred to in the report in terms of the housing and business capability assessment, so understanding the level of need. There's work going on in terms of, I think you'll read in the report about Simon Bell being appointed to support developers, so there's partnerships being put into place with developers. There's work underway in terms of looking at what can we do with regards to the district plan to incentivise a greater level of reinvestment into brownfields development, so intensification effectively. So there's a lot underway. What we haven't got as yet though is, whilst we've got a lot of work underway in the way that we are proceeding, what we haven't got yet is a task force agreement as we had for the emergency accommodation for the motels.
that task force agreement, will you be asking for a ministerial oversight so that they can work quite nimbly on the ground?
I think, Your Worship, that's maybe a question that you yourself would want to answer.
But so I'll enjoy being part of those meetings. And at the very enthusiastic TPK breakfast this morning, there were many aspirations of iwi expressed, and the link with this Housing Acceleration Fund. So it looks like we're trying to tie so many threads together here so that we optimise development as fast as we can. Will we be covering all of that with iwi present as well, with their aspirations next week?
Look, absolutely. I think the challenge that we've got in Rotorua is significant with respect to housing availability. That's very clear to everyone. The answer, though, in terms of a solution, in my view, and I know this is where JP's team is working, we can only move forward to address the level of demand if we work collectively. That's got to be, it has to be the way forward.
Councillor Jonathan, followed by Councillor McPherson, and then Councillor Okawate.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and probably another question for Jeff, and it's around the commentary at the bottom of page 45 and top of 46 around the motel use for emergency and transitional housing. I attended a very positive meeting of the Rotorua Association of Moteliers last week, and you know, they're looking very positively around the future return of tourism into the coming season, coming out of winter, and want to ensure that visitors to Rotorua get the best visitor experience that we can provide. So my question is, who is leading the comms around the end to the mixed use of motels? Is it council, or is it one of the other agencies, or is there an overarching or a lead comms entity person for the work of this particular piece of work, because there's quite high interest from the tourism sector in how we're going to get ourselves in the best position really for the coming season. Thanks.
So just last week we started conversations about having a program manager being put into place to really oversee this work. The expectation is that they would provide reporting both to the various parties involved, but also coordinate communications. So we're currently looking towards that, and Rosemary Visconich has actually picked up that responsibility and is currently shaping that work program at the moment. It's a complex project, and it's involving a lot of parties. So we've got multiple government agencies, we've got council, we've got iwi, and so communications become in that environment a lot more challenging, because what you're looking to try and achieve is agreement across all of those partners as to what is it that is actually needing to be released and when. But at the moment, I think the key role of the task force and the key focus of the task force is actually implementing the strategy that's been agreed. Once we're getting towards the end of that strategy, there will be an announcement as to what has actually been achieved and what the system now looks like.
Councillor McPherson. Thank
you. I'd just like to ask, same area that Councillor Donaldson referred to, that is my interest is in the functional scope of this task force. Is it going to look forward to and link itself into transitional accommodation, employment opportunities, as well as the consenting side of life? What's the scope of this, the functional scope of this task force likely to be?
So you'll recall that the task force was set up primarily around an acute concern as to how well people's needs are being met in motels. That was the focus area. And the initial requirement was to actually identify an approach which we could provide absolute certainty that people's needs who are homeless are being well met and that they are safe and well supported in transitional or emergency accommodation. That was the original intent of the task force. You'll also be aware that we have already got in place a housing strategy, and the housing strategy is a strategy that's got multiple parties aligned to it, so it is a government and iwi-led strategy, and the work around that is continuing. The task force, though, as of really over the last few weeks, has been focusing a lot, obviously, on the getting in place the strategy to assure emergency accommodation needs are met, but they're also looking at how do we actually get people out of motels, because that's the ultimate aim. And so to that end, work is actually underway to say, how do we get transitional housing into place? How do we increase the numbers of transitional homes that are actually available? How do we actually provide alternatives to motels for even emergency accommodation? So all of that work is currently live, and the task force is actually looking at that. The next stage of work is obviously, I think, where the Mayor was questioning, and that is to say, we're only talking, as I've just outlined, in the emergency and transitional housing space. We really won't start addressing the broader housing issues in Rotorua until we're actually addressing the entire housing spectrum or continuum, and that will be the focus of where we need to turn to next, as to, you know, what is a longer term, more intensive strategy that will meet the needs over the next 10 to 15 years in Rotorua.
Councillor Okawate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I don't know who the various CEOs are that are coming from Wellington next week. So I guess my question is to you, Jeff, and it really is around, I mean, this morning we heard from the three ministers at the breakfast that we attended that, you know, you cannot see housing in isolation from health and employment indeed. And so that's what the ministers stressed this morning, Jeff. So how do we impress upon those CEOs, and I'm not sure which portfolio they come from, but how do we impress upon them that if we're going to work collectively here on the ground, then so should they, or anybody that they are of their people who they're talking to here at local level, because that is actually going to be the key, this coherent, constructive working together.
I can't agree enough, and that will be a central focus of the discussions, absolutely. I think it's worthwhile, though, looking at the strategy that was agreed for the management of emergency accommodation, and that what's been implemented there is not only a different way of actually identifying and managing the placements, but also a different way in terms of understanding who are these people going into them, what are their needs, and how do we also provide wraparound services to them when they're placed into motels. That's a new facet of the work that has actually been introduced, and that will result in a hub, an assessment centre for people who are homeless, so that it's not just about placing them into a facility, it's also about ensuring that the services they need are also made available to them. So whilst it needs to be a centre focus of the discussion next week, absolutely, I think we can see in the strategy that's just been implemented also a growing awareness that we need to be actually looking holistically to the needs of people who are in these situations.
Thank you. Mr. Hurd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to move on to 527, a Wood First policy review. I've got a very keen interest in this area, as I was the original author of the Wood First policy that was ultimately adapted, then adopted by Council, and now, of course, we have a national government similar policy with the low carbon procurement policy. So I have two questions. One is, apart from that brilliant building up at Sion, what other projects have we undertaken that have really put this policy in the forefront. Because we seem to be letting a lot of opportunities slip past with new buildings and here and there, and not actually following through with this policy, which is world-leading stuff, I think. With the advent of climate change, we're going to see more and more and more wood substitution coming into the marketplace because it is the one material that has a credit carbon footprint, the only one. And it's sustainable, renewable. And we're sitting right in the heart of it here. It's a real opportunity for Rotorua. So that's my first question. What else have we done? My second question is, how do we get to have an input to the policy?
Look, I think I would have to defer to JP on this one to give a fuller answer, but I think the key focus, if you look back and even if you look at the Forestry Futures Plan that has actually been put into place, all of these things are all interrelated. The work that has gone on, I think, with Red Stag at the moment, the development work that is actually underway for the mill, will actually make a significant difference to the availability of wood product. And so what we'll start driving is availability in a way that we actually haven't actually seen before. If you go back to the experiences, I think, of the developer who built the ACC building, there were certainly some clear learnings about the availability of product at that particular time. So the Regstad development, I think, will go a long way to address that. My understanding is that a combination of JP's team and also Red are looking to pull together stakeholders around the review of the Wood First policy and, in fact, the Forestry Futures Plan. So there will be ample opportunity to actually be involved in those.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kaifong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This just follows on from the long-term plan additional feedback, which was just additional work that Council is going to undertake. So how quickly will we be looking at a development contributions policy or framework? Or are we going to?
We'll refer that to our Chief Financial Officer, Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We are targeting to develop the policy for public consultation in the next 12 months before year 2 of the LTP commences. That is the current trajectory.
Thank you. Were there any other questions? There appear to be none. We'll move to Operations Group. And just to clarify for those who may get a little lost, the different sections you'll see are numbered by points. So we've been on point 5 and we'll now move to point 6. And there's a title, which is where you can define where the next group is. And we're now on the Operations Group. And I'd like to invite Jocelyn Mikaide up, and we are on page 48.
Morena tātou. I've got the operations report there within your documents, and so I'm going to take the report as read. And I did have a couple of highlighted bits that I wanted to note, and that one is that we're really delighted by the news that the Bay of Plenty Regional Council has allocated $4 million through the LTP submission process towards our museum exhibition. As we've spoken about in previous hui, it's always been our plan and desire that we would achieve that funding, but to have the funding sort of take that next step is extremely relieving and really, really awesome in terms of beginning the development of our exhibition. So I did want to note of appreciation towards all those who have worked so hard on that, both the application but also the support we've had in terms of presenting to the Bay of Plenty Regional Council and the council itself. That was my kind of highlight note.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Just a follow-up from my question last month on this was, and I know how constrained we are as an organisation, is there any wriggle room to digitalise the art collection so that it can be available for the public online? Because we've got an amazing collection.
The team are considering that option.
Yeah.
And we can we can note that that's one of the things that's been noted and requested. At this point, I wouldn't want to commit to doing that because you can imagine the size of that project. However, you're quite right, having it available for people to be able to see. Although once we get our museum reopened, we really want people to come to our museum and view the stuff.
So the international best practice is that so many people view online to see the uniqueness of the collection, and the provenance of our collection is unique and isn't just a glory box of fine art and collectibles. And you've brought the policy to us, we strategised it, but we all know that this is a long-term project, and to not have the public able to view, even if we could bring little bits of it out into the Galleria, it hasn't got the right air quality standard there for viewing, and that's stopped us in the past with some of the really good wrecked collections and pieces. But there is a great desire for people to see online what we've got, and I think it can be just done slowly.
And I think our team are really excited to start to examine all the possibilities, and certainly they want as many people as possible to be able to view the taonga that we have available within our collection also.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Miss Bray.
Kia ora, Jocelyn. The Aquatic Centre, the refurbishments, 6.13, it says there that the concept landscape design is complete now. I'm concerned about that fence that's on the neighbouring property right there at the beginning, at the entrance there. Last year I made some inquiries with council staff to help out to get that fence back up, because the residents down Tarua Road said that it fell down in the wind and because flax was removed, and it's been like that for a long time. So, yeah, it looks terrible.
Kia ora, I'll look into that and get the team to come back with a response. Absolutely.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Jocelyn. Just looking at paragraph 6.3.4, number of consents issued compared with 2020. And I'm just guessing here because the figures don't always tell, the obvious story. But if you look at the top line, number of building consents issued, it's significantly down 21 to the previous year. But am I right in thinking that 2020 has a bit of a bulge due to individual wastewater consents for the scheme going into Lake Rotorua?
Actually, when we're talking about the building consents, and I asked this question too because I was like, wow, it's less than, why is that? So the team are reporting that it's due to the change of regional rules around fireplaces, so that's seen less consents being applied for, and so that's ostensibly the reason. But as you can see, the actual amount, the value of the applications is well up on previous years.
Yes, I do note that new dwelling consents are up and subdivision lots are up as well, so that's encouraging. But it was just getting clarity around that drop in overall number of building consents, and it's those minor fireplace changes, etc.
That's what the team's reporting to me at this stage, because they sent it through with their kōrero to me, and I just had noted it and thought, well, that's weird, why is that different? So yeah.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. Councillor Yates.
Tēnā koe, Jocelyn, and through you, Madam Chair. Mine isn't a question, it's a comment though, and I do want to acknowledge this particular kāhui because it's an extensive kāhui. It covers so many different aspects across Rotorua. One in particular, an acknowledgement on the Aquatic Centre outdoor pool. That's getting a lot of traction and a lot of great use, and I'm hearing that from around the motu. We went to a swim meet in Hamilton only 2 weeks ago to hear compliments of that outside pool, so nei rā te mihi kia koutou. Lakefront development, just the other day, Pukeroa o Ruawhata were expressing their they were pleased to see the work not only that Infracore have done, but the whole lakefront development that will once again enhance Pukeroa development that has just kicked off with its pouring of its concrete earlier this week. And then finally, also just to pick up on the arts and cultural side of things, we're getting a huge traction, and whilst some percentages are better than expected at this time of the year, the arts and cultural realm are certainly starting to pick up. So it's a compliment to you and the team on behalf of myself and our community. So nā rā te mihi kia koutou.
Thank you. Mr Hurd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kia ora, Jocelyn. My question is about the new dwelling consent numbers. I see we've done 209 year to date, which is 60-something% higher than the same time last year, so we're probably headed towards 280 odd this year, which is good, and it's a big step up, so well done. However, when we look at the overall situation, my understanding, and I'm pulling together numbers from all over the place here, is that we need something like 6,000 houses by 2030, and that's about double 300. And when I look at the national stats, we're building just over 2 per 1,000 of population in Rotorua, which is one of the lowest in the country. The country average is around 7 per 1,000 population per year. So we're well behind the 8 ball. Do we have a plan to kind of double that number and reach that 2030 target?
Kia ora. I'm going to hand to Jeff shortly, but yes, yeah. I mean, so we've looked at those numbers ourselves, and we know that a number of those homes need to be affordable houses and frankly public housing as well. So part of the work that we're doing through the community, our task force that we've got in place at the moment is working with them to understand the number of homes that they are going to be able to build over the next sort of 10 years as we move towards 2030. And then, of course, the work that JP's doing is to try and help ensure that we have the right amounts of land available and zoned correctly, so that as our private builders come through, they're able to get up and get their subdivisions over the line. We're also working in our planning space to ensure that we have a good sized team and actually just reporting that we've had some success there, because we look like we've attracted a good planner into the team again. So we're seeing people come through to try and ensure that our processes are in place to enable the consents to be issued when they do come through. So we've got a really big focus at the moment around enabling both public and private people to come through and start doing their building. We're talking about meeting with developers to ensure that they understand what's required when they come through and put their applications in, and we're really wanting to make a difference in that space to ensure that it's easier. And one of the subdivisions last month was a big comprehensive sort of 26 house lot that came through, and we're wanting to see more and more of those. So we recognise the need for more housing. We're working with our government partners to ensure that the public housing side is taken care of, but we do recognise also that the private building space will want to be able to come through, and when they do, we are trying to make ourselves as flexible and quick as possible to help them with their development aspirations. So,
thank you. Supplementary question. Are we at the stage where we can sum up all of that good work to get an estimate of the likely outcome in numbers, or is that too early for that?
I think it may be a little bit too early for that, but I can see that there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes. I'll refer to our Chief Executive to answer the remainder of your question.
So, look, as Jocelyn's done a good job. We've got plan changes, consenting pathways being streamlined, global stormwater consents being investigated. So a lot, as you say, a lot of work is actually currently underway. Having said that, the housing and business, the HBA, a housing business assessment that is referred to in the strategy section, is a piece of work that I think you're looking to. What that does is to try and give a picture of what is the current demand, what is the current shortage of housing available, and what will that look like over the next 10-year period. what the team is doing is to superimpose over that what do we know is currently underway, what do we see will be available in the future, such as that is predicted in the spatial plan, to try and understand if there is actually a shortfall. So that work is currently underway and will be coming back over, I would say, over the next few weeks to council with a view as to what that actually looks like.
Councillor Kai Fong, followed by Mr Waru and then Her Worship.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question sort of follows on from Mr Hurd. So just in terms of the issuing of building consents, we've got the numbers that are going through, but do we have exception reporting so that we know that, you know, X% basically go through the system pretty much trouble-free, and, you know, a certain percentage take a long, long time and they're always pushed back and pushed back and pushed back? And then are there learnings that we could take from that to either upskill our builders and developers and public about what's expected, so that when they come to council, these building consents can go through relatively quickly, so that when we ramp up, we've got all our processes in place?
So we do monitor what that looks like manually. Our new system that we're working through one council to get in place will help us greatly with that, and that's due to come through next year. But we're monitoring that manually and trying to learn as we go where there are issues, like where we see developers coming through with common things that aren't right with consents. We're also reflecting, though, on our own part in that and making sure that we are not going to be the barrier. So while we have an absolute, we have to maintain our legislative sort of role and make sure that we're making good decisions as part of resource consent issuing, we are trying to make sure that we are taking an approach that allows people to move through the process more easily, and we're taking the feedback on quite seriously, and we're beginning to meet with developers to get direct feedback from them, because quite often we'll hear feedback through our elected members and through other sources, but actually sitting with the developers and talking to them about it. So that's one way that we can make sure that they know what our expectations are. We're also trying to work quite closely with our the other consultants who work in this space in town to ensure that they know, and we've got a good understanding between us around what is required, what's going to come through the system, what should be submitted and when.
Thank you. Mr Waru.
Tēnā koe te tia mana. Kia ora Jocelyn, tēnā koe tō reporter. Busy bee. That's all I can say there. But no, I'm glad to hear, and I think the key word, just more of a comment rather than a he pātai, but the key word there is enabling. And I'm involved in a few developments and in a business commercial sense and in the private sense as well, and been through doing it for a while, and that's really the key. Is their developers are very aware there's a particular process they need to go through, and you know, I know council's always been given, oh, you know, this is making it too hard and all this kind of thing. But just one thing I'd like to remind everyone that even when the process is good, we can't make people build. So although we can be very efficient, and I know you are, you're just like that, Jocelyn, and your team, in the end of the day, it comes down to that person building. So you don't take it too hard, because I know I can hear it. They're, oh, how are we going to get to this? How many houses and all this kind of thing? End of the day, we're restricted by certain things we can do here at the council. And that's what we can do, put in the best things possible to help that process. Rotorua is a very interesting place to build into. If you don't already know, we've got plenty of different kind of land and geotechnical challenges as opposed to Avarohe. So, you know, those are things that I suppose this council would learn a lot more than others. So, kaiti miha ture kia koe me tō team. O tira kia tātou katoa. Kia ora.
Kia ora Rawiri, kia tika tō kōrero. Last comment from your worship.
Probably, Jocelyn, I don't know if it's you or Stuart, but I do want to just comment on Te Akamori, because what a stunning uptake there is in activity there and a community space. It's dearly loved, and it just doesn't take me long to go back to the opposition to, you know, our restoration of the library, and that it might have even been threatened. But it is now a community hub that, especially with the buses and the public transport, the number of people around there is phenomenal. The use within the building is amazing, and the culture of the staff is what I want to comment on. And I went to Judge Bain's book launch, and it was absolutely delightful. The staff stayed on. They helped with the cup of tea. They helped with seating. It wasn't their job, but they went way out of the way to make this a beautiful evening. So it's now a community hub that in my eyes, you know, can be replicated actually, but it's a bumping space, and it is also incredibly effective for our children to go to the Children's Health Hub that once the DNA rate at the hospital was parlous. So it's a wonderful space, and I just want you to pass that on to the staff, because they go way out of their comfort zone sometimes and their time to provide support for community events. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jocelyn. We'll now move to point 7, our infrastructure group. I'd like to invite Stavros to the table, and we are now from page 60 to page 68 of our agenda, the infrastructure group. Welcome, Stavros.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just take the report as read and happy to respond to any questions elected members may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Were there any questions?
There you go.
Yes, Councillor Maxwell, followed by Mr. Waru.
Thank you. Stavros on page 68 there. Can you tell me just a little bit more? I know it's in the setting up process, but those shared services with, who are we talking about? Are we looking at other TLAs around Bay of Plenty or Waikuria? How wide is it going? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Maxwell. I think that relates to joint activities with the Waikato shared services local authorities. We collaborate on a number of areas, including technical specifications, procurement, and so on. One of the things we have been doing recently is to collaborate with regards to the management and monitoring of trade wastes. Until now, our own laboratory was doing that work, but as we're moving towards the Three Waters reforms, we migrating a lot of these activities gradually at a regional shared service basis. It gives us some depth in terms of skills and continuity, because over the next few years there will be significant changes, and obviously beginning that process to collaborate in this area would be supportive of any changes that may come ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Waru, or did you say you wanted to go last?
No.
Oh, yeah, Mr. Waru.
I'll go all the time. Ka kia ora. Kei te miha tu kia koe, Stavros. I always make it a point that I have to ask you something every meeting. So I've got a few partai, actually. Tuatahi, I know everybody's thinking it, but just not saying it. So how are we doing with the roundabouts and at both ends, please? Are we on track? Have you received the report at all? Kia ora.
Thank you.
I'm not reading Daily Post.
I think by saying both ends, you mean east and west?
Well, take it how you will.
To the east, obviously, stage 1 of the Tinai Road, Sala to Isles Road is progressing. I do understand there are some degree of perceptions that the work is progressing slowly, but remember their time frames is to complete all their works, including the Tarawera intersection by September this year. And to the best of my knowledge, that is still on program. One of the apparent delays is because the contractors and NZTA are dealing with some challenges with utilities underground, and they need to be careful not to interrupt services in that respect. To the west, the Nogodaha roundabout, I think, is progressing well. Again, these are understandable frustrations by the commuters, as they move, through the construction sites. But again, works needs to be balanced against safety, and again, their time frames have been well established, and I have no information to indicate that any delays, to that extent.
So we're on track. Kia ora. Because I do notice there's a little bit of impatience starting to creep in now, in the mornings in particular. Hoi no tera tera. My second question was regarding the waste. And I recall a couple of months ago we had a presentation around the use of, the kai waste. Tera. But it was that one. Has there been any progress to that?
Yes, we are progressing our business case with regards to establishing a framework of potential costs and benefits for that activity. And as you recall, in the draft LTP considerations, you have agreed, or the Council has agreed, that in year one of the LTP next year will start public consultation to that effect. That will inform a final report, to this Council to give effect to such an activity from year two. So everything's progressing, but of course we're waiting for year one to start, establishing that consultation process.
Yeah, I was more talking about the business case, but thank you. I'm excited about that one, actually.
Yes, likewise. Your Worship, the Mayor, followed by Councillor
Just two questions, one small and one lofty. One about schools, asking us about waste collection from schools. So quite a lot of pressure coming on us, and Councillor Wang and I are having to go to a couple of schools, and they're really interested. When can we get schools into the waste collection system? Because they, at the moment, don't feel linked, or are not linked in to our City Council waste collection. And yet these are the children of the future that we're teaching to recycle. Can you explain how we could weave them in the future?
I think there are two distinct elements to that. One is the collection services.
Yep.
We provide collection services on the basis of a targeted rate that paid by ratepayers. Now, schools are managed by the Ministry of Education, and a lot of them have unique arrangements and so on. But again, we're quite proactive in that respect, and we go to schools and offer them different kinds of services through our established contract arrangements here too, but also the education part. And we are developing, and we continue to work with them, but obviously we need to, I think last week we had 120 kids from one school in the recycling centre to have a look at the processes there too. So it's an ongoing process. We'll continue to do that. But with regards to schools themselves actually undertaking commercial collection of their services, it's an offer and acceptance. They're not part of our residential target rate process.
A question that we're all aware of that seems to be happening around us in the announcements yesterday about the Three Waters reform, for other councillors, because we seem to be zooming endlessly. Can you just give a broad, sort of a high-level update on where we're at?
I think we've talked about it in the past, and I think this is work in progress, but I'm sure elected members would not have failed to notice the announcement made yesterday by the Minister. In broad sense, there are a number of areas which are undeniable facts. We do have an aging infrastructure, we do have some growth and new standards to be addressed, and this is consistent with our own diagnostics, as we've done for our own infrastructure here too. There are also some elements which are facts are constructed in a way to suit a particular policy at this point in time. I think a wise head around this room said words to the effect that the decision, the solution has been found, and now just trying to stitch the problem to it. And I think there is undeniably the direction the government is taking is towards Three Waters reforms. The Minister said it very clearly yesterday in public that there's a compelling case for change, and you can, we will have to participate in the process. My understanding that the legislation or the Minister's decision would be coming in the near future along the lines that it's not optional, it's going to take place. You will notice some numbers came out yesterday in the quantum of $120 to $185 billion required to address emerging standards. It's a bit surprising to me. If you put into the context of the total replacement value of the Three Waters assets into the country range between $60 and $80 billion. If over the next 30 years the government asserts that you have to invest between $120 and $185 billion to address a problem, that means in a period of 30 years you have to more than twice replace your entire asset stock. And it seems to be inconsistent, but at the end of the day, the numbers are structured in a way that reinforce the case for change. Again, the Minister said some numbers around the fact that users of Three Waters are facing a steep cost change from about an average of $1,000 a year at the moment to $14,000 a year. Again, you can use these numbers to reinforce your case. I think our approach, and as you know, I participate in the National Steering Group, to that effect, we will work in that direction. We will address the things that need to be addressed, and obviously in due course, we'll be reporting to you as to what are the systems and the mechanisms and the risks we need to be addressing through these processes. My personal opinion is that the decision by the government has been made, and I think the question for us is that how do we take the most advantage of that decision? I think in response to a question I had recently, is that the only option? And the answer in my mind is not the only option, but if the government thinks it is the option, then the question is that how can we influence alternative options to that? Thank you.
I could just add that for colleagues, I'm on Zooms too around this, which is the political angle as opposed to the operational working party about making the best of it. And I've found that our summary, yours and ours together from the workshop that we had about these are our bottom lines approach, these are things that we won't trade away in this process, is really helpful. So that workshop has helped enormously for us to put our position quite clearly. Thank you for the update.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Chair. Stavros, just on your Three Waters Business Operations 7.5.1 and wastewater, and I'm just picking up on Mr Waru's comments around the growing impatience with roadworks, Wakakotahi roadworks. No surprise to some of us who were here when Ferry Springs and and Lake Road were four-laned, but I think there's been some added complexity go into that piece of work, and I'm delighted to see that the opportunity has been taken for additional bracing and strengthening on the pipe going to the forest from the wastewater treatment plant, given the sensitivities around the cultural and environmental sensitivities around the lower Puarenga. So that's great, but also, I think, if we're upfront and open about that, I think people understand and are comfortable with the delays. But the ambulance station going in, is that what's created that need for that big turning bay in the middle of Tēnā Road, just beyond the Puarenga heading northeast? Because that ambulance station there wasn't a happening thing when stage 1 was first designed, is my understanding. So I think it's useful to have that out there as well.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yes, I think sort of probably a number of you may realise that as you start a project like that, circumstances change around it, and we've been working with WNZTA to make sure that we are as flexible as possible. At the same time, also, it's quite important for people to note that the section of Tina Road from Sala to Tarawera carries 45,000 vehicles a day. It's a significant volume of traffic, and therefore random right turns through the media is totally unadvisable. However, the ambulance came through, and I think the ZTA has been working, and us obviously working with it to make sure that it is not a black and white situation. So, and again, other elements that contribute to some delays is actually the encountering, as you said, the need to strengthen a sewage pipe underneath the bridge. There are a number of utilities underneath the road that feed, especially the eastern suburbs, and it's been our expectation through NZTA and the contractors that will not disrupt electricity supplies and gas supplies and water supplies. And obviously they have to navigate very carefully around these lifeline utilities at the expense of productivity sometimes.
Thank you. Were there any further questions? Yes, Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick one to Stavros. For the other councillors around the table, are you able to please update us on the work that the Rural Community Board is doing with the waste team on the Ngākuru Upper Atiamuri Horohoro waste service?
Chair, Trumpet probably will be more, more up to date with that. But our work is to continue to explore the possibility of extending the waste collection services in those communities. However, we need to consult with those communities to make sure that there is a majority community support, identify operational challenges for that, and we're working through that. I think in terms of the context of the volumes, are small volumes, but obviously we need to ensure that any service offering has to be appropriately designed to meet the varied needs of those communities. Some of them got very, very long driveways, some of them are clustered together, some of them are individual houses, are way far away from the main roads. And I think we're in the process at the moment of exploring that operational challenges for that before we make a final call on to that process.
Thank you. There appears to be no other questions. Thank you very much, Stavros. I now invite Gina to the table, and Gina Rangi will overview the Manahotu Māori. We are on point 8 on page 68.
I'll take my report as read, but if there are any questions, I can respond.
Ka pai. Mr. Waru.
Kia ora, te te amara, tēnā koe Gina. Ngā mihinu kia koe I tō reporter. Hono, paku pātai noho tāko. So, given the importance of the decision that was made some weeks ago or a month ago around the Māori wards, I'm surprised it's not in your report. So, in terms of the next steps, has there been discussion around that at all?
That will be in the June period. The May period. We're still in the April month, so it will be in next month's report. And yes, early discussions have started around what the process might be. I don't really have a firm report to give.
No, makes sense. Kia ora.
Thank you. Your Worship.
Gina, what I think is mind-boggling for us all to read is the Te Amorangi unit's advice across council. So we just want you to know that we support that mahi, because that is getting us a very different result. But it takes a massive amount of work. But we just felt that sometimes we just read it and they don't realise what's behind it. But the work on housing, community safety, liaison with iwi, hapu, lakefront, it's a mammoth task. I hope you've got all the support that you need.
I have an incredible team who are well connected across Te Aroha. What I would also say though is that we are working with teams who we're not having to convince people as to why it's prudent to work with Te Aroha. What they're asking for is how, and that makes a big difference in terms of the responsiveness of the organisation.
Thank you.
It really does. Thank you, Gina. There appears to be, Councillor McPherson.
That's not something I'm dealing with directly. It's something that might be dealt with in Jocelyn's team, although I don't know if there's anything to report at the present. Pukehangi pā.
Yeah, perhaps they could come back to you.
So I'll get a report and find out for you.
Councillor Maxwell.
Kia ora, Gina. And I know it doesn't come into this cycle, but just are you able to give me an update on since the hui that Councillor Waru talked about? After us were some other people who also received Maori awards. Do you have an up-to-date figure of how many councils around Aotearoa? Because that was the closing date.
Local Government New Zealand did do a survey. Well, I think at the time that we'd made our that you had made your decision, that the number we had was 28 or 31.
28 on the day.
Yeah, it's now in the low 30s, although I can find out the particular number, but they had done a further survey.
Yeah, and just further to that, a very excellent report you provided for us all to Gina. Kia ora koe.
Kia ora.
Yes, thank you very much, Gina. Well, that concludes our operational report. I'll take a resolution to go into public excluded, and then I recommend we take a 5-minute break before getting into the confidential agenda. But I will I'll advise that there are 4 items for consideration in the public excluded section. Number 1, Te Whare Taonga o Te Aroha update. Number 2, Sir Howard Morrison Performing Arts Centre update. Number 3, Rotoiti Rotorua Sewage Scheme update. And number 4, a Blue Baths update. The reasons for going into confidential are for commercial sensitivity and to enable commercial or industrial negotiations. I ask a mover or seconder for the motion that we move into public excluded. Move Councillor Yates, seconded Councillor Okawa-Tate. All those in favour, please say aye. Thank you. And we'll take 5 minutes for you to refresh yourselves, fill up your cuppa if you want, and we'll get into our confidential agenda.